America is an open society where each person may define his or her own goals, and each may pursue those goals within the framework of law that provides protection without encroaching on equal liberty. We live in a globalized civilization. To a great extent, globalization demonstrates the strength and vitality of the American ideal. The American ideals of rule of law and the equal moral dignity of individuals are widely admired, and we should look to a world in which future generations of Americans move across the globe with the same ease they do across the continental vastness of the United States, as each follows his or her own self-chosen plan of life. The committee organizing Law Day this year invited me to speak about Magna Carta and the rule of law. In many ways, the Magna Carta is itself a symbol of globalization. Its ancient principles now refined and embedded in the structure of law found on many continents. This year, especially, we commemorate the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. The Great Charter of Liberty was signed at Runnymede in England on June 15th, 1215. Runnymede is just 20 miles west of central London, not far from where Heathrow Airport now sits. In 1957, in recognition of the importance of Magna Carta, the American Bar Association dedicated a monument, built a monument at Magna Carta, at Runnymede. And over the years since, the ABA has sponsored other commemorative events. It may seem surprising that the ABA built its monument to Magna Carta when it did in 1957. But we should remember that during the Second World War and in the course of the Cold War, Magna Carta was viewed as a principled foundation for a distinctively Anglo-American law, the source of the values that characterize the American-led Western Alliance. In 1941, in his third inaugural address, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt hailed Magna Carta as an embodiment of the democratic aspiration. Well, that may be too strong a claim. After all, Magna Carta was drawn up by a king and unelected barons. These barons were not concerned with the liberty of the people, still less did they promote democracy. Rather, the aristocracy sought to preserve its own powers and privileges against tyrannical and grasping monarchy. Yet in this struggle within the ruling class, the principle of universal liberty was glimpsed. Magna Carta promised liberty to all free men, forever. The liberties contained within the Charter included the principles that no tax should be imposed without the consent of the General Council of the State, that fines and other punishments be proportionate to the offence, that property not be taken without compensation or consent, that courts of common pleas meet regularly, and that judges should know the law and duly observe, that merchants have safe and secure passage, and that in peacetime any law-abiding subject may leave the country and return safely and securely. These are guarantees of liberty that we cherish to this day. But perhaps the two most powerful features of Magna Carta are these. The principle of due process, originally formulated as, quote, no free man shall be taken or imprisoned or outlawed unless by the lawful judgment of his peers, by the law of the land, and a principle of equal justice before the law, originally formulated as, again I quote, we will not deny or delay to any man either justice or right. Perhaps, needless to say, these rights of equal justice for all under the law were not consistently followed. Indeed, in England, the de facto privileged legal status of the aristocracy was preserved until modern times. Yet Magna Carta served as a historical anchor for the mythical claims to the ancient liberties of Englishmen in the lead-up to the English Civil War in the 1640s and the so-called Glorious Revolution of 1688. It inspired a quest for judicial independence and parliamentary control as both judges and legislators battled the overmighty power of the king. Thus, the Great Charter of Liberty, promised during the power struggle within the ruling class in the 13th century, was reimagined and reinvigorated during a power struggle within the ruling class in the 17th century. The prospects of liberty advanced when the rulers were divided, and when fractious rulers had to rally the people to their cause. Much of the inspiration of the American founding of 1776 and indeed the Constitutional Convention of 1787 may be traced to the 17th century political and ideological turmoil in England. Many of the early colonists viewed themselves as carrying forth the ancient liberties of Englishmen and were to jealously guard those liberties. The Library of Congress, in its recent exhibition on Magna Carta, noted the work of jurist and Puritan minister Nathaniel Ward, who in 1641 compiled the Body of Liberties, which contained a synopsis of Magna Carta's guarantees of freedom from unlawful imprisonment or execution, unlawful seizure of property, and right to trial by jury, and guarantees of due process. The Library of Congress exhibit observed that over time, all of the colonies adopted language from the Magna Carta to guarantee basic individual liberties. It is in the 5th and 14th Amendments of the Constitution that we have the greatest echoes of Magna Carta. The guarantee there that no person should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law incorporated the model of the rule of law that English and American lawyers associated most closely with Magna Carta. Further, the principle of due process formulated in Magna Carta, that no freeman should be taken or imprisoned other than by lawful judgment of his peers, is refined in the modern right to trial by jury. That right is secured in Article 3 of the US Constitution, and it is fortified by the 6th Amendment guarantee that the accused has the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. The right to be free of unlawful imprisonment promised in Magna Carta was not secured until the writ of habeas corpus was refined in the 17th century English corpus. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus is among the civil liberties identified in the very first article, earlier than the Bill of Rights. To the citizens new and long established, in commemorating the Magna Carta in its 800th year, we rededicate ourselves to the values at the core of American law. Liberty is not license. We must bear the full weight of responsibility for our actions and abide by the democratic rule of law. But within these limits, the future, your future, should not be excessively bound by the horizons of the past. We are not bound by the ancient formula or Magna Carta, but may reasonably and responsibly clarify and, where necessary, innovate and improve upon long held principles and their application. To conclude, the promise of Magna Carta, only fleetingly realized at first, if it is not lost, must be guarded by a vigilant people. We, the people, must protect, preserve, and improve the legal framework and the democratic culture that values liberty. We, the people, must protect liberty through the courts. We must preserve liberty through the vitality of our electoral democracy. And we must promote liberty through civic engagement. Education in liberty is not the job just of schools and colleges. Civic engagement in a democracy is the real school of liberty, drawing from an ongoing and open conversation among equal citizens. That is the great task of each citizen, whether American-born or naturalized. It is the task to begin again on this law day and on this